Welcome back to my airline history series. Today we're going to talk about Northwest Airlines. Northwest is one of America's OG airlines, but it actually merged with Delta back in 2010. But its history is pretty interesting, so I thought we would talk about it. So Northwest was originally founded in 1926 as Northwest Airways. It was initially headquartered in Detroit, Michigan. And it started by carrying mail, but by 1927 they were also carrying passengers. And then in 1929 the airline was bought by a group out of Minneapolis, Minnesota, and so the headquarters was moved there. 1931, Northwest sponsored Charles Lindbergh, which I'm going to need to do a whole video on him because honestly he had such a big effect on aviation. But anyway, they sponsored him to explore the Great Circle route, which I know that comes from Louisville, but it's the best picture example that I could find. They were leaving out of Minneapolis. It's essentially a route that comes from the United States up to Alaska, or over Alaska now, over to Asia. Previously, these routes had been flown through Hawaii and then the Philippines and then up to Asia, so the Great Circle route is much more efficient. So then during World War II, Northwest actually flew a lot of soldiers and supplies from the west coast of the United States up to Alaska. They also renamed it Northwest Airlines in 1933. But then once the war was over, because Northwest had experience with the Great Circle route, the United States government awarded them many of the routes to Asia. In 1947, Northwest became the first airline to offer passenger service directly from the US to Japan. And they continued to expand their Asian routes from there, expanding into China and Taiwan and the Philippines. At that point, they started rebranding as Northwest Orient Airlines. Their official registered name never changed from Northwest Airlines. This airline really started to expand throughout the 50s and 60s, flying all over the Midwest and the West. And also some flights to Florida. In the 50s, Northwest meteorologists actually pioneered the first clear air turbulence forecasting system, which is kind of cool. They entered the jet age in 1960 with their purchase of their first DC-8, and they continued to upgrade their fleet, including Boeing 720s, Boeing 707s, and then the Boeing 747. And then after airline deregulation in 1978, Northwest was able to expand its network into Europe. And in 1986, Northwest merged with Republic Airlines, not to be confused with today's Republic Airways. And it was the largest airline merger at that time. And it was at this point that they stopped using the Northwest Orient name and went back to just being Northwest. And Northwest became the launch customer for the Boeing 747-400. They purchased the first one of these that was ever built, and it's now housed at the Delta Flight Museum, which I got to see earlier this year. Also in 1989, Northwest got bought out by a group that also owned KLM, and so they formed a strategic partnership between the two airlines called the Wings Alliance. Northwest was looking good into the 90s. It had more self-check-in kiosks than any other airline, and they were the first major US airline to offer internet check-in in the year 2000. 9/11 unfortunately had a really big effect on the airline industry as a whole in the US. Northwest had honestly been feeling the pressure before that even happened. They were already making pretty significant cuts, and then after 9/11 they had to make even more cuts, removing a lot of in-flight amenities like pillows, peanuts, and in-flight entertainment. They also joined the SkyTeam Alliance in 2004. Even despite all of the cutbacks, Northwest had to file for bankruptcy in 2005. They emerged from bankruptcy protection in 2007, but they were facing quite a bit of competition on their Asian routes from Delta and United. In 2008, Northwest announced that it would be merging with Delta to form the world's biggest airline at that time. The new airline would use the Delta name and branding. The last official Northwest flight was in 2010 from Los Angeles to Las Vegas.